Hello, greeting friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Mel and welcome to my living room. Hello. My office is yet to be ready. As you guys would know, I recently moved and it has been quite a journey. My office is the only place in the entire apartment that I have yet to figure out. I finally found bookshelves today, so I am finally gonna be able to organize tomorrow. In the meantime, welcome to my living room. Today's video is going to be quite juicy and quite interesting, so I hope you're ready for a chill time just talking with me. Hi, welcome. I have done a video similar to this back when I started my channel, so a while back, where I talked about overhyped books or super popular books that I personally did not enjoy. They did not live up to the hype, and I thought I would bring you guys a renewed version of this video, an updated version if you will, where I talk about popular books that I read and I did not enjoy. And you guys know me, I hype myself up a hell of a lot when I'm gonna read a book, whether because I made my own research, built up my own expectations, whatever it was. I was excited about all of these, and unfortunately, I didn't love them. And before we get started, I do want you guys to sound off in the comments. What are some books that you have read that were super popular, super hyped, that you did not enjoy? Hello? Hi? Doing a small pause so that we can thank the sponsor of today's video before we get on to the rest of the video, which is a book of the month. Now, I don't get tired of saying this, but if you guys have been here for a while, then you know exactly who Book of the Month is because they are a long sponsor of the channel. Book of the Month is essentially a super popular and fast-growing online book service for readers, and their mission every single month is to bring you new and early release titles so that you can fall in love with books without really doing the research process part of it, because the way that this works is that their team vets through hundreds of books every single month. They literally scour the industry for the latest releases, and they bring you a selection of 5 to 7 new releases that you can spend more time reading and less time researching. Book of the Month is also awesome because it is risk-free, meaning that you can skip any month, anytime, and you will not be charged for that month. And let me not forget to mention that they also support a ton of new and emerging authors. And if you're the type of person that just loves to see titles that you maybe haven't heard of before, or some that you're also heavily anticipating, then Book of the Month has you covered. And look at this month's selection. Let me just go over them because I am super excited about most of these, and I know you guys will too. For their thriller, they've got Breathless, one that I was super excited to see here, and that is Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour. And in this one, we follow two imperfect women longing for a place to call home. It is a literary fiction and one that I cannot wait to experience myself. One that I've never heard of before, but it's a gothic fiction and it sounds super cool because it deals with a haunted house, and that is The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. For their historical fiction, they have Take My Hand. For their romance, they've got Part of Your World. And last but not least, we've got a fantasy pick this month, and that is Darling Girl, which is a Peter Pan reimagining. And let me not forget to mention the thing that I am most excited about this month that they included, and that is A Book of Night by Holly Black, which is one of their add-ons. So you can add this to your box for an extra cost, but I would highly suggest doing so. And those are the picks for this month. Book of the Month is honestly the best place to get new hardcover fiction for a price that you're not gonna see anywhere else. But if it's your first time signing up, you can use my code MelReads, and that'll get you your first book for $9.99. So thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video, and without further ado, let's get right into today's video. Now we're starting in hot with No Exit by Taylor Adams. Arguably one of the booktube darling books, one of those books that everybody just raves about. The best thriller I've ever read, the best plot twist I've ever read, and I am still sitting here in this chair to this day, May 17th of 2022, wondering what the hell this plot twist was supposed to be. Because to this day, I am still underwhelmed with everything about this book. And dare I say, for those who think that the movie is bad, it's just a representation of how bad the book is as well. So in this one, we have Darby, who's the main character, and she finds herself stuck in the Colorado mountains due to a blizzard. She finds herself going to a rest stop, and there she meets 4 other people. There is this great, twisted, sick mystery to be solved, and one young kidnapped girl to save. That is essentially the premise of the story, and I don't know if I'm just not vibing with the rest stop sort of stories where it's all condensed to mostly a single, very small space without much else to go to, because I had a similar experience with Survive the Night, which essentially all took place within close quarters, but this just annoyed me to no end. Not only was the writing underwhelming based on all of the praise that I had heard for the author and the book in the past, but also the main character. I don't know if I'm the only one that did not find her in the least compelling. She is supposed to be the heroine. She's supposed to be making all of these big big acts of, once more, heroism in order to save this young girl, in order to save her own life, and in order to potentially also save the other innocent people at the rest stop. However, and I understand that obviously as a human, sometimes you don't know what to do in these cases because they are pretty wild, but honestly, this girl just kept making the same mistakes over and over again. And not only did they come across as incredibly annoying on her end, but also the fact that she kept repeating her actions over and over again. And the villain of the story would still not catch on to what she was doing. Just felt incredibly unrealistic to me. And I was like, not the damn window again. That's just what I kept going back to the entire time. And as I kept going with the story, I was like, okay, so there's gonna be something really twisted happening. There's gonna be something really crazy to happen yet, and nothing did. You would think, because it's a thriller, that the villain or the twist, once more, would be revealed later on into the story. However, the villain is introduced and revealed pretty early on, and so the story basically just becomes a story of survival, which I know a lot of people have loved. However, it was not necessarily what I signed up for when I opened this book to read it. And not only that, but it felt very good versus evil in a very cheesy way, which sometimes things are, but in this it just felt like the villain was like evil for the sake of being evil without having any quote-unquote real motive and without any real depth to any of the characters. Everything just felt very surface level with the story, and that was not something I enjoyed in the slightest. Next on the roster, I have what could potentially be deemed as one of my most disappointed reads of last year. That is Where Dreams Descend. I was so excited for this for a number of reasons. You guys know me, I'm a theater kid. I cheese hard for anything related to musical, to plays, to theater in general. And when I saw the pitch for both this and the sequel, Phantom of the Opera meets The Greatest Showman, Phantom of the Opera meets Hadestown, it just felt like the best combination of elements in order for me to enjoy it or potentially enjoy it. And it just didn't go down that way. The setting for this one is the Conquering Circus, where there is currently a competition going on to see who will be the newest additions to the circus. And in particular, we follow three characters who all have very different journeys. We've got Kalia, who is the star. She's like the star-studded queen in this entire novel. She's obviously the protagonist. We've got Jack, who is the keeper of the club. And then we've got DeMarco, who is the magician. And all of these people will face the truth behind the Conquering Circus, everything that's happening behind the scenes, and potentially facing a threat that lives in the shadows. Once more, it seems like a recipe for success for a number of reasons. And when I was reading this book, I was trying to understand the rules of magic, which in my opinion were very loose and confusing. I was trying to keep tabs on how this world worked and how the magic came to be, how the magic manifested for certain individuals, and ultimately I ended up being very confused about how the magic worked in this universe. And beyond that, I feel like it had a massive issue with the main character. Talia was not a point of view that I liked to read from in the slightest. It felt like the entire world was revolving around her and every character in the story was subservient to her for absolutely no reason. Everybody bowed down to her. Everybody was there for her, helping her, doing things for her, just being incredibly supportive because she was this very special individual, except for the facts that I never really saw anything that was particularly special for her in order for people to react that way. And it just felt like everybody was idolizing this girl and putting her on a pedestal when she never really did anything incredibly special. The way that the love situation presented itself in this book was also not something that I found believable at all. The way that the buildup happened just didn't make a lot of sense to me. I never felt the chemistry between the two characters that were supposed to be falling in love with each other. And then the ending of the book was arguably one of the most interesting parts, but also, again, confusing. I feel like the majority of this book was just confusing to me. And I know a lot of people didn't love Jack when they were reading this book, but to me, he was not only the most complex character, he had a lot of depth, but he was also, like, he was there on the scene and he just stole the scene. It was like, oh my God, now I'm paying attention. Now I want to read more about this. And he was not the center focal point of the story in the slightest. But when you have him as a parallel to the Phantom in the story, it is something that you can squeeze so much juice out of, but my glass was half empty. Next up, and you would be no stranger to this if you've been on my channel in the past, but next up on my list is Normal People by Sally Rooney. I have a very strong dislike towards Sally Rooney's writing. This is no surprise again if you've been here on my channel, but I just do not vibe with her writing style, the way that her sentence structure, paragraph structure goes down, and even the topics of her books and how her characters don't progress throughout the story in the slightest. So in Normal People, we follow Connell and Marianne, who throughout the entirety of the novel, Sally Rooney makes it seem like they are incredibly normal people, incredibly flawed individuals, which they are, for going through these toxic cycles in relationships, in friendships, and never really breaking out of that, never really being able of escaping each other in the way that they maybe should or maybe shouldn't, and also just facing everyday societal expectations, facing everyday normal people problems. And they are normal people problems to some extent, but it is wild to me that throughout the entirety of this book, none of the characters displayed any growth. They kept going to each other willingly. They kept calling it fate. They kept saying that God made you for me and you're perfect for me. And I just don't think either of the characters were very likable to me. The way that they kept phrasing sentences and referring to each other both on a personal basis, but also in front of other people, and how they would ignore or not ignore each other, or acknowledge or not acknowledge each other, depending on the people they were surrounded by, and how again all of these societal expectations played into the relationship. I just found it absolutely annoying to read about. And as I was reading, I was just flabbergasted at this novel. At first I was like, you know what, maybe I can vibe with this. I genuinely thought I was gonna read this book and I was gonna be in the minority but also majority of, oh my god, I loved this, my favorite book of all time now. And I wasn't. Like, I was genuinely very disappointed. I could rarely find redeemable moments or moments of enjoyment as I was reading it, and it felt more like a task to continue than it was to DNF. The way that certain situations were also addressed in this book, like the potential sexual assault or sexual assault, felt very unrealistic and almost disrespectful to me. The nuance that a situation like that would take to write about and address was very lacking in this novel, and I was just once more flabbergasted at the way that certain things were being written. Also, can I just mention, no quotation marks, like what is with that? I literally could not distinguish who the hell was talking because every character's voice felt the exact same. And the way that Sally Rooney kept distinguishing who was talking was Marianne said, Connell said, he said, she said. Could you imagine how many of those you would cut if you only had quotation marks? A concept. You guys would also be no strangers to me absolutely despising miscommunication in books. Again, in some books it works and in some books it doesn't. Yes, it's a human experience. I think we've all universally experienced the experience of miscommunication. If people would have just communicated in this book, I think this book would have gone down very differently, and it literally would have been probably about 20 to 50 pages long. And I also think, which is something I've experienced in other Sally Rooney books, that her representation of mental health and coping mechanisms tends to be more harmful than actually either educational or an accurate portrayal of what that might look like. And obviously, not to leave this out, everybody's experiences with these topics are different. However, when you make this massive branch assumption that this is how some people assimilate things, and you almost build this stereotype and you almost build this archetype, that is not something I really vibe with, especially in the context in which she wrote it. I just didn't like it at all. Next up, we've got My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. Another author I have a love-hate relationship with his books. Absolutely adore Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Felt very meh about the Final Girl support group. My Best Friend's Exorcism was just not a book I enjoyed. In this one, we have Abby and Gretchen, who have been friends for forever, it seems like. They befriended each other when they were really young, and they spent every waking moment that they could together, watching movies, playing around, and just really bonding in a way that almost felt like they were sisters. They were very inseparable, up until one day, Abby essentially convinces herself that Gretchen, because of a change of behavior, is being possessed by the devil himself, and now she must find a way to help her friend exorcise her and save her from this massive evil. And mind you, I don't think this book as a whole is terrible and unredeemable. I did enjoy the beginning aspects of this, seeing their buddy budding friendship was something that I genuinely enjoyed. Seeing their backstories and why they behaved the way that they did was something that I personally found really, really interesting. I think the exposition of this book is the strongest part of this book, but when you actually get into the possession part of it, into the paranormal aspects of this, it felt very campy. Campy in a way that I just didn't enjoy at the time. Maybe if I read it now with different eyes, maybe I would enjoy it just a little bit more, but I think I went into this book expecting just a paranormal horror thrillery book, and instead I got a very campy horror book that kept getting more outrageous as I kept reading. I was reading this and I was like, there is just no way this is a serious thing. It felt like a Sam Raimi movie with like the gore and all of the cheesy elements of horror meeting scary movie in a book format, when that's really not what was sold to me at all. I think the premise of the book leads you to believe that this is going to be a very serious novel about best friends fighting this once more potential paranormal evil, and this just ends up turning into a comedy horror, again very campy, in a way that I just didn't enjoy, and I think it was mostly based on my expectations when I was walking into this. Next up on my list, I've got Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. I read this book for a video and it went very interestingly. I genuinely thought I could have enjoyed this a little bit more at the time, and then I read it, and would I still read the sequel just for the funsies, just for the memes, just for the memes? I would. This is one of those books that I rated incredibly low, gave it 1 star, but I still had fun with it. This book was just outrageous in a variety of different elements, but let me start by saying this had so much potential. I was here for the tropes in this. Marriage of convenience, you've got enemies to lovers, which is arguably one of my favorites, and in my opinion, one of the best romance tropes you could have in a fantasy setting. It just works incredibly well, particularly with a fantasy romance. It is literally top tier. And then you've got a marriage of convenience once more between a witch and a witch hunter, which honestly, I don't see a lot of that in the books that I read, but I just think it's a really interesting trope to use once more to put in all of those tropes that I previously mentioned. And the romance in this book, I'll say this yet again, I also said this in my video, it felt very akin to the MGK Eminem beef era that we got a few years ago. Literally, first of all, you sound like a bitch on one end, literally, and then the other end is insult me one line, compliment me on the next. Yeah, that's exactly what their romance felt like, and it just felt like going in circles around the same situation and tiptoeing this line when it was clear that they were very much into each other. I understand why they would neglect those feelings for as long as, well, at least he did, because I think he was more stubborn than she was, but it still was annoying to experience at times. And then the magic system, it felt very surface level. I really wanted the author to go deeper into the witch's magic, how it all worked. I really wanted her to go deeper into these different covens, into these different areas of the magic system, to see exactly how they differed from each other, how exactly they work, how exactly our main character was as good as she was, and really just have a bit more of a complex magic system with very clear rules of magic. It just felt very relaxed in terms of the magic system. It felt like there was a lack of explanation for a lot of things, and the inklings that we did get of the world building, it was interesting, and that's why I kept going. I want to see more of it. I want to read more of it because there's tons of potential here, and yet I am getting big scenes with Big Titty Liddy, and once more, and I'll quote myself, people chanting Big Titty Liddy and Big Willy Billy like we're at a Queen concert singing We Are the Champions. Like, why? That is something I'd probably expect out of a middle grade book just because it's very age appropriate for the characters that we're reading about. But in a YA/new adult fantasy romance book, I would not expect characters to try and ward off witches by singing and chanting something about a big breast lady in a bar. It was just odd. It was just so incredibly odd to me that I was just sitting there both perplexed and entertained. Another one that will probably shock people who are new here, A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, just did not work for me. I had heard so much praise for this series. I even read 2 books. The first 2 books, read them completely. Could not go further than that. I had heard and people had told me, just give it time, it gets better. When will it get better? Because I still have many questions and not enough answers, and I just had to stop. I think the premise of the trilogy is very interesting. You've got a world where there are 4 different Londons. There's Grey London, White London, Red London, and then Black London. All of these have been infested or experienced magic in different ways, and therefore the colors kind of represent what the magic has done to each world, whether it has corrupted it, completely destroyed it, whether it's completely non-existent, or whether it's there and it's just doing its thing without really harming anybody. And we have our main character, who is Kel. He is one of the last few Antari, which are people who have the ability to travel between Londons, and he ends up meeting Delilah, otherwise known as Lila Bard, who is this sort of pirate. She is a thief, and she basically convinces him to sweep her away into another London and to have an adventure after she saves his life. Just the 2 books. I found the second book a bit more interesting than I did the first one, and actually, funnily enough, my favorite character was neither of the main characters. It was actually Alucard. I wanted to read more about Alucard. I found him the most interesting, the most compelling, and yet I was stuck with Delilah Bard for the majority of the book in not only an incredibly annoying fashion as one of the main characters, I could not stand her at all, but also in a very insta-lovey relationship that made absolutely no sense to me. I could not see the chemistry between Lila and Kel, and it was honestly one of the most jarring things I had to experience as I was reading these first 2 books. I was sitting there trying to connect the dots as to why they were into each other, why she freaking cared so much about Kel, what was so special about either of them, and how they could even stand each other in the first place, because I could not stand any of them separately or together, which was just like the worst thing to read about. And I think my biggest issue with The Darker Shade of Magic was that either nothing interesting was really happening, or at least for my taste it wasn't, or I just didn't care about anything that was happening once more, including the main characters, and it just felt very difficult for me to stay connected to whatever was happening, because I honestly, I could not care less. I was not given a single reason as to why I should care for any of the characters in the story. I also thought at the time, and I still do think so, that whatever the story was building to at the end just felt pointless, because the climax was incredibly underwhelming. And that is something that I've experienced with Schwab before. I really have this up and down relationship with her work. Some of them are really phenomenal. Some of them just I haven't liked at all. And this was just one of them where I tried to like it. Again, I read the first 2 books and it didn't improve a lot for me. I can't remember if I gave the first one 1 or 2 stars, but it was somewhere along those lines. And then the second one I gave either 2 to 3 stars. Again, somewhere along those lines. Hello and welcome to the Crown of Gilded Bones rant, brought to you by yours truly. Hello. I really liked From Blood and Ash and the sequel, A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. Do I think they're the most original things I have ever read? Absolutely not. I think if anything, those 2 really replicate other works that I've read in the past. I think Jennifer L. Armentrout tends to grab really flashy plots, flashy characters, flashy plot lines that have massively worked for other authors. Mainly in the similarities that I see is to Sarah J. Maas, and she tends to grab that and she tends to incorporate that in her stories in a way that just lacks originality for me. And even though both of these books were similar to things I've read in the past, I still really liked it, and I think the way that she kept trying or succeeding at subverting these classic werewolf vampire tropes was really interesting to me. And I think the premise itself for the maiden and what role the maiden plays into the ultimate plot was interesting to me. So in this we have Poppy, who is a maiden, and she has been grown up very sheltered with a very nailed down purpose. She is essentially brought up with the idea that she will one day come into maidenhood and she will help society and the world get better, essentially. And she cannot be touched, she cannot be addressed. It's like you can't even look at her because it goes against the rules of maidenhood. And then she meets Huck, who will prove to her that life is so much more than what she has grown up to believe within her sheltered experience. And so the first 2 books were, they were good. They were not the best works of literature I've ever read. However, the 3rd book, I had already heard that the 3rd book was not it. Not only was I incredibly bothered by the fact that this book is so freaking long and absolutely nothing happens, I was also incredibly bothered by how JLA writes within a fantasy setting. It's fascinating fascinating, but also not enjoyable at the same time. And this is something that massively peeved me as I was reading this book. She writes these grand fantasy settings. There's dragons and there's vampires and there's werewolves and there's magic and there's maidens and there's gods and deities, and there's just so much happening on a fantasy level. And then you've got a lot of colloquial language. Mind you, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but when it's the sole basis of how characters address each other and talk to each other, again within this grand fantasy, clearly not urban setting, it genuinely throws me off and it pulls me out of the story. Not only that, but then also you have the story in which nothing happens and nobody knows anything up until somebody remembers, or up until somebody decides to say something about it with the pretext of, this is the best kept secret of the land, you were not supposed to know. It's like you've been withholding this information for 300 pages in which these characters have been asking over and over again what this thing means, and you decide 300 pages later to finally open your mouth. What did I read those 300 pages for when you've been present in the story this entire time? Not only have you been present, but you have also been directly asked what this exact thing means. It was just so annoying because it happened so many times within the story, and what would have otherwise been a really interesting plot based on how book 2 ended, it was just wasted potential. All of the answers were incredibly obvious to me and to everybody, I would assume, beside the characters in the actual story. In this book in particular, it really did feel like Jennifer L. Armentrout was covering up the lack of a plot, the lack of an actual foundation for her story with romance, and it just felt like a distractor a lot of the time with the romance, with the smut, and I just didn't vibe with it because I was not getting any substance anywhere else. And that's it for today, you guys. I hope that you guys enjoyed this one. Those were the popular books that I read but I did not enjoy, and if you have any that may or may not be on this list that you also read and did not enjoy, let me know in the comments. I am also super intrigued to know what you guys have read and disliked in the past. I think it'll spark some really interesting conversation in the comments. So don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it, and subscribe down below if you want more bookish content from yours truly. I am constantly uploading videos that I am sure you do not want to miss. And if you want to support the channel further, I do have a Patreon. We have all sorts of things over there, from a book club, a Discord server, watch parties, live shows, extra videos, all the fun stuff. It is always linked down below, and it massively helps the channel grow. Keep it going. If you would like to join the family, that is there alongside the links to all of my social medias. If you reach the very end of the video, let's leave a devil emoji. I feel like a devil emoji is kind of fitting in honor of my best friend's exorcism. Thank you once more to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget that you guys can check them out over at the link at the top of the description, and you can also use my code MelReads to get your very first book for $9.99, which again is a steal for new hardcover fiction. So thank you so much to them for being a long sponsor of the channel. I love you guys so much, and I shall see you on the next one. Bye guys.